Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. It's lesson 26. Today I'm going to show you how to make big hoops so that you can knit in the round to make larger things, or so that you can use these as basically straight circular needles and make very wide things like afghans. So you can see on the table I have a variety of hoops of lengths and of different materials. Now, if you're not familiar with circular needles, usually that little cable is attached, permanently attached to the knitting tips, like the set I showed you the other day, but not always. That's the complication of circular needles. So they'll often come in sets with little tips and the cable separate, and they screw on there. So with each tip size you have a variety of length in your cable, and that's so that you can knit in the round, because eventually, just like we did the hats, those stitches have to come all the way from the tip all the way around to there. Like this little hoop, I was able to get 42 stitches on here without stretching it out too badly. So that's the conundrum when we make these, and I think it still has to be stiff, because you're either going to want to hold it down between your knees like we did the knitting hoops, or to put it in something, a basket, a bin, or once the knitting is on there you can hold it in your lap because it'll have weight and it'll stay there. But just to get started, so anyway, I went to the store, I got a variety of materials, and the reason is I wanted to experiment, for one thing, but the other is the sizes we need aren't available in all of the products. So you have to do some hunting and picking. Now, I made the mistake of not taking my ruler that had my millimeter mark on it. It only had my, inches and segments of inches. So I had to have the guy in the store look it up on his smartphone for me so that I could do the conversion. And I'm going to put that down in my description of this, and I'm going to explain to you what I used for my hoops, and you can use other things, but to get the right diameter, the smallest one, you remember, is our US 15, or a 10 millimeter. So I I have a bunch of it here at the house. I got the 3/8 inch, I keep calling it polystyrene, but it's polyethylene tubing. And I already put my wire in there. And by the way, for these, they don't have to be as stiff. I don't think you're going to want to hold them down between your knees the way we did the hats. So I bought a 50-foot roll of 9-gauge wire. It's $10.48. I cut mine with my cutoff wheel on my Dremel tool. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but to me that's the easiest. But it really makes it hot, so be careful when you're doing it that way. So anyway, that PEX tubing makes the US 15 size, or not the PEX, the polyethylene, the 3/8 inch polyethylene. And then for my US 17 or 12 millimeter size, I bought one 5-foot piece of PEX tubing, the 3/8 inch PEX tubing, and I cut it into a 3-foot piece and a 2-foot piece, put wire in each of those, and that stayed well. I didn't think this wire was going to be stiff enough for this PEX, but it worked just fine. I didn't heat this or anything. I still have to plug the ends. If you don't do that, that wire is going to work out. Then the next size up, I got the 1/2 inch PEX tubing. This was stiff, but it's still molded. If I would have made this shorter, I might have had to put stiffer wire in this. And this is actually 48 inches tip to tip. So this 1/2 inch PEX will give you your US 19 or a 15 millimeter. And for my next size up, I had to choose this. And it was okay, but this was the most expensive because I think it's $1.79 a foot. And this is reinforced tubing. They sell it by the foot, not at Home Depot. They don't sell it there. You have to get it at Lowe's to buy it on the roll. And wire is in there too. I should have made my wire a little longer, but actually I bought the tubing a little longer than I needed. Only buy this by the foot. Because, well, you can buy it in the half, but they're going to charge you for each foot you buy. So they actually charged me for 4 feet, even though I only have bought 3.5 feet. There'll be a little bit of this reinforcement stuff sticking out, but that's alright. Now, it's soft. It's like fabric in there. Now, and it'll stay stiff, unlike that other vinyl tubing that crushes. Now, they were out of the size of tubing I wanted for the US 50s. So I came home and I did surgery on these because the weather was bad and I didn't want to go to another Lowe's. So these were the same knitting needles I held up the other day. And what I did was I took my Dremel tool and I cut off the tip very carefully. I cut it way low just to see what it was like inside and stuff. And I just kept working it up and cut off the end where the knob was. I never did like these knitting needles. But this would be an expensive way of doing it. But by doing this, oh, and then I was still a little too big, or a little too small. So I could see one side of the pipe had a little more plastic than the other. And I took my scissors and I very carefully shaved it. You don't really want to stick a drill in there because you might make a mistake, take off too much plastic. But by doing that, I was able to get that onto my 3/8 inch pipe. And I made this 3/8 inch guy. Not only is he going to do double duty, I made something that's adjustable. So I can make this, anywhere between about, 30 inches long and almost 4 feet. So, and you want it to be kind of hard to get on there because otherwise you're going to slide all over the place. But if you looked at a cable needle, you would see at the base, where the actual cable is, that it's tapered. So I have to kind of work it on there, and that's just what you want. So now I've made a set of 50s that are adjustable just by wasting these. So if you have a coupon, for like Pectans or someplace, and you can stock up on cheap plastic knitting needles, you can make them like this and, avoid all this rigmarole. But it isn't expensive to do it this way. Now you have knitting tubes that you can use either to knit in the round, the way we did the hats, or you can use them as straight knitting needles. And by doing that, I just created a knitting pipe, basically, that's, 2, 3, 4 feet long as you would want them to be. You can make these as long as you want to. At some point, it's going to get awkward to hold, but I still like this teardrop shape. So now I'm going to turn my chair around, and you are going to use this just like you did the knitting hoop. Now, if I were the little ones, if I were holding it in my hand and casting on, I might want to do a slingshot cast on if I had a little one, just like I did in the hat videos. And if you remember, what I did with that was I held my hoop like that, like a backwards C, and I put my slip knot on there. You can go back and look at the hat videos, but this is just a quick, and then I did this. I made a slingshot cast on, if you remember. And that first one's always hard, so look at me, all thumbs. My yarn's all goobered up here. Alright, there. It's my second stitch. You see what I'm doing a do-si-do here with the hoop itself. It's not easy to do. So you have to, part of my problem is I already have a slip knot in there. So you're just digging it under there, going under there, bringing it around. Okay? And that's how I would do it if I were doing a slingshot cast on with this. I think you're going to find it's easier, though, especially with these bigger ones, to do this instead. So you can hold the hoop this way. It's really difficult to hold it this way. You can, depends on what kind of pants you're wearing, too. But to cast on, I think it's easier if you've got it like this. And you could do this on either side, but if you want to cast on to the right, as I usually tell you to do it, so just do the long tail wraparound cast on like we did our new cast on method, just like that. And use the pipe that's nearest you is the easiest to do. And that way you can move your hands and hold the pipe steady. Because you saw what trouble I had just doing it with this one. So, part of it's the opening. And you can always adjust that, by the way, by pinching the end of your tube so that your tips are a little closer together. Because that's why I made the knitting stand the way I did, so I could always adjust where the tips met. Okay, so now you've got some stitches on. Now, I played around with this several different ways. You could knit on this just like real circular needles. In other words, you would knit a row and you would turn it around. That's what you do on regular circular needles if you're using knitting needles, as knitting needles. I'm going to tell you not to do it that way because I think it's going to confuse you. I think the best thing to do is to treat this just like your stationary rod stand and knit right to left, left to right, right to left, just like always. So that means if you're knitting in the round, you don't have to change your pattern. It's going to be just like real circular needles. But if you're knitting as them, as using them as straight needles, so you can make like a big white afghan, I would say let's treat them just like stationary rods, and that will be much simpler. So you'll still transpose, your left rod, just like you do on the rod stand. And to me, that makes more sense for our purposes. So when you go to knit on this now, remember that, and I would go back and look at the hat video, because when you made your hats, you had to turn your stitch. And when you do it on this, you're going to treat this just like your stationary rods, and you won't. So if it's easier to think of it, put it in something that will kind of hold it. I like this basket, it's what I used the other day. But until it's kind of coming out of there, it's going to want to slide around in that basket some. So you could prop it up with some more yarn. But the nice thing about the basket is, and once you have something actually growing on this, that will hold it in the basket for you. But you can use it as where to put your yarn too. So you've got two bang for your buck there, because it'll hold your yarn and your knitting rod. So treat it just like your stationary rods, and make sure you have your working yarn, and then treat this just as you would your stationary rods. And so you would knit back and forth using the same type of stitches, using your front stitches and back stitches. And if you had a lot of stitches on here, you would need occasionally to, pull this back out of the basket and work those stitches back up. Obviously we only have, 5 stitches on here, so it's not a problem. But if you had a lot of stitches, so whatever you're propping this in, it should be something you can pull right out. I like this basket because it kept it off the floor and off my lap and away from the cats. And this cloth seemed to work really well, and it gives you a place to put your yarn too. But you could just as easily, once you get more adept, hold the whole thing this way and treat them sideways. Or once you have a lot of knitting on here, making an afghan or whatnot, it'll lay in your lap. It's just right now there's nothing to hold it there. But once it's full of fabric, that will hold it on your lap for you. And you have something that's portable and flexible for creating a lot of different types of widths, and inexpensive to make. So grab your wallet and your keys. Happy knitting.